Kira and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be sharing some super positive vibes by talking you through all of my favourite things from the month of September. Kind of can't believe I'm saying that because September was such a busy month that it flew by, and I can't believe that we are now technically already in October, only 3 months left of the year. How wild is that? But regardless of how much I can scarcely believe it, it is true, September is over, and despite having a super busy month, I still found quite a few things that I'd love to talk to you about, so let's jump into it. As always, kicking it off with my favourite book from the month. I actually didn't read quite as many books as usual in September, and it was a little harder to decide which one was my favourite because if you've seen my September reading wrap up, which went up last week, you'll know that I had a really incredible reading month in the sense that whilst I didn't read quite as many books, I loved all of the books that I picked up. But eventually I decided that my favourite read of the month was The Switch by Beth O'Leary. Beth O'Leary is an author who is definitely making her way onto my favourites list. Although she only has 2 published books so far, I've loved both of them. Her first book, The Flat Share, I read last year and loved. I've now read The Switch and love it. And she also has a new book coming out in April of next year called The Road Trip, which I am almost certain I'm going to love as well. She's just one of those authors who I'm feeling like is just a guaranteed 5-star author because her writing is just so up my street, and she basically does romance in the way that I love because she combines romance with some more serious storylines. Also, she does dual perspectives, and I just absolutely love everything that she does, and she basically brings together all of the elements that I love so much to essentially create the perfect book. So like I said, Beth O'Leary writes in a dual perspective way, so we have 2 protagonists. In this book we have a granddaughter and a grandmother. Yeah, that's the right words. We have a granddaughter and a grandmother. We have Lena, who is the granddaughter. She is basically a very career-focused woman in her 20s. She's working for this like high-flying investment bank, climbing the career ladder and basically just grinding away and essentially like burning herself to the ground because she is running on empty, working like 70-hour weeks, never taking time off, and just basically, like I said, burning herself out. And then we have Eileen, who is the grandmother, who lives in a small village in Yorkshire. She essentially is just like a classic old lady. She's really involved in the community, running community events. She knows everything about everyone, and she's just an all-round cool guy. But the only thing that is kind of sort of pulling Eileen down is the fact that her husband, who she'd been married to for years and years and years, cheated on her with a dance instructor and left her, which wasn't a big loss in the sense that her husband was kind of a waste of space, but it has kind of left her lost and confused in terms of where she wants to go, how she can find romance at her age, and basically just like who she is outside of being a wife to someone basically. And so that is kind of what is going on for Eileen. And then down in London for Lena, she is working away, like I said, burning herself to the ground, like working with no energy. And she, because of this, makes a big mistake in one of her meetings at work and is then instructed by her boss to take 8 weeks holiday in order to try and sort of get back on her feet because she hasn't taken any holiday for 2 years. And so because both of these women are both dealing with some quite like intense situations and just basically don't know what they're doing with their life, they're kind of at like a crossroads, I would say, they decide to switch places. So Lena moves up to Yorkshire to live in her grandma's house. She gets involved in the community and basically steps into her grandma's role and takes time away from work and has to kind of give herself time to wind down and just like check back in with herself, whereas Eileen starts to ramp things up again by moving down to London to live in Lena's flat with her flatmates, and essentially she basically tries to find love by signing up to dating sites, meeting people, and basically just going on this incredible adventure and reminding herself that just because she might be in her 80s, it doesn't mean that she hasn't got any zest for life left in her. And I just think that is such a fun premise for a story in general because it's just something that I've never seen done before. I was a little bit apprehensive about going into a book which focused on this dynamic between a grandma and a granddaughter. I just wasn't sure if I was going to particularly find it very compelling, but it was incredible. I loved it. It was so fun. It was really fun, especially I think to see Eileen going into London and doing the whole dating thing, and I just feel like it was such a fun way to sort of bring some attention to those older ladies and kind of just show that they still can be really fun and that they can still sort of have that sense of energy about them. And it was really nice, I think, to see Eileen go on this self-love journey where she moves out of this relationship where her husband was really sort of ungrateful and just not very loving towards her, into these new romantic relationships where she meets men who are really lovely and really uplifting, and she kind of uses that experience to sort of re-find her love for herself and sort of rebuild her self-esteem. So I'd say Eileen's is the more light-hearted of the two storylines, whereas we see Lena kind of dealing with this really serious circumstance of dealing with burnout, which is something that I think a lot of people in their 20s deal with when they're going through that career climb thing. And I think that she also is dealing with grief quite severely. Lena's sister Carla passed away after a battle with cancer, and so all of the characters that we have in this book are dealing with grief because they've all lost this girl, this Carla, and yet they're all dealing with it very differently. Lena, I think, is taking it very much to heart because she's lost her sister and feels like she should have been able to do something to save her. Eileen seems to take on that role of being the sort of like solid foundation for the family, and although we don't get the perspective of Lena's mum and Eileen's daughter, she is a character that we see, and Marion, the mum in this book, is dealing with grief very differently as well, in the sense that she's constantly trying to distract herself by getting into new fads like crystals and meditation and all kinds of things like that. And so we see these three characters going through this very similar situation very, very differently, and I think the way that this book explores grief is one of my favourite things about it, because it really does show that it's an entirely individual experience and something that, regardless of whether you all share the same grief, as in that you've all lost the same person, your experience of grief will be very different, and that even comparing your experience of grief to yourself will not really work, because you could be doing absolutely fine one week and then the next week you might really be pulled back into the depths of grief. So it really shows how it is obviously super individual and also a constantly evolving and changing process, and there's no sort of one linear grief experience where you'll feel it and then suddenly you won't. This book really explores how loss is something that changes you and will stay with you for a really long time, but I think the characters in this book, we see them go on this journey of learning to adapt and evolve with their loss, using it to sort of embrace who they are after having lost someone significant to them, rather than allowing it to keep them trapped in the past. And so I felt like I could talk about this book all day, because despite being a book that I expected to be light-hearted and pretty chill, fun and romance focused, it's a book which does so much more than that. It really does have that balance of the really wonderfully fun, light-hearted, funny and heartwarming storylines with, like I said, those more serious storylines about things like grief and burnout and self-esteem, and I just think it combines all of those things so well in a way that you just really don't want to put this book down, because it is incredible. Next up, I have a foodie favourite to talk to you all about, and we all know I love food so much, so picking a food favourite at the end of each month is always so difficult, because I could talk about literally pretty much any item of food all day long. I just love food so much, but I have to pick a favourite, and one favourite that I actually ended up only getting towards the end of last month but have just been thinking about ever since because it was so delicious was these Wicked Healthy Lemon Cupcakes. Wicked is a brand that has vegan foods in Tesco here in the UK. If you're not from the UK, you won't be able to get your hands on these, but if you are, I'd highly recommend them. They're so delicious. Wicked have absolutely everything from like vegan dips and lasagnas and curries and ready meals and pizzas to things like cakes and cupcakes and sticky toffee puddings and brownies. So they really have a wide range of products, and these are probably my favourite thing from their ranges that I've tried so far, because lemon cupcakes are delicious. Lemon cake in general is one of my favourites because it is so refreshing and delicious and absolutely incredible, but these were so good. I was so excited to find like vegan cupcakes, because I find that often vegan cakes come as just like a full cake size, and that's not always that practical if you aren't in the mood to eat a whole cake, because although quite often I am, there are times when I want to have a little bit more self-restraint, and also you just sometimes don't want to have a full cake going stale on the side if you're the only vegan in the house who's going to want to eat it, whereas these cupcakes are obviously more individually sized, and because they come in this little container, it's easier to keep them fresh, so you don't have to think about eating them all at once, although you totally could if you wanted to. Essentially, they are the most light and fluffy and delicious vegan cupcakes topped with a absolutely delightful vegan buttercream. They taste so lemony and zesty and refreshing, which I absolutely love because lemon drizzle cake is one of my favourite things of all time. I just think it's so great. And so these are delicious. They also have chocolate ones that are exactly the same but chocolate flavour, which I haven't tried yet, but I am very much intending to do so. Chocolate cake is not my favourite, but I'm also not going to say no to it. And I just kind of want to compare the chocolate ones to these lemon ones to see that I definitely prefer the lemon ones, because I'm 99% sure that I will prefer the lemon, but I have to test it just to make sure. But to summarise, really love these lemon cupcakes. I would highly recommend trying them if you can. They are just incredible. Next up, I'm going to chat to you about my favourite YouTube channel from the last month, and a channel that I've been watching a lot of recently is Waffles with Layla. Layla is a vegan fitness and foodie channel, and I love her content so much. She makes the most incredible looking high protein vegan foods, which is incredible because sometimes you just need a little bit of inspiration when you're not really feeling that excited by the thought of like beans and lentils. Whilst beans and lentils are great staples, sometimes you just need someone else to give you an idea for something to mix up your meals, and Layla's channel is incredible for that. She films food in the most aesthetic way possible. It looks absolutely incredible, and she's also been doing some really fun foodie challenges lately. She did the 10,000 calorie challenge, which is a challenge that I love to watch. It just absolutely like mesmerizes me watching people try to eat that much food. She's also done a like eating only foods of a certain color challenge. I think she's done green, pink and purple so far, which is really fun. And then she's also done only eating savoury breakfast for a week, which I thought was fun because I'm also a sweet breakfast person. And then most recently she did an eating emoji foods day in the life, where she picked all of her meals based on the food emojis, which I thought was really fun as well. And then aside from her specific food and fitness content, she then also does just general weekly vlogs, which are some of my favourite things to watch, and it's just really fun to see everything that she gets up to because her content just looks so lovely. So I would highly recommend checking out Layla and her channel. I will link it down below. I absolutely love it, and I think if you enjoy any of the foodie parts of my channel, then you'll definitely enjoy hers as well. Next up, we have my favourite product from the month, and inconveniently I'm actually wearing my favourite product, and it is these Sweaty Betty leggings. I love Sweaty Betty so much. I think it is just the best brand for high quality yoga leggings specifically. I love other brands for leggings that I would wear to the gym, like Gymshark and things like that, but Sweaty Betty I think has really nailed yoga leggings because they're really like thick and high quality. They're high-waisted, which I absolutely love, and they also are not particularly slippy. And the reason why I say this is because in certain yoga poses, such as tree pose, you'll be putting like one foot against another leg, and there's nothing worse than doing tree pose and noticing the sensation of your foot sliding down the leg. And I think Sweaty Betty, being a brand that is quite focused on yoga, definitely has managed to create that legging that has good grip. And I love these ones because they're just such a cool pattern, but essentially really comfy, super bright and colourful. And as we are now in September and moving into the colder and darker season of the year, I think it's really nice to brighten up the day with your clothes. When you can't guarantee sunny weather outside, it's just nice to put on something bright and colourful, because for me at least it always fills me with a little bit more joy knowing that I am bright and colourful and adding a little bit of vibrancy into what might be a very gloomy day like today, where it is currently raining and very grey outside. Next up, we have my favourite TV show from the last month, and it was pretty easy to actually like narrow down my favourite TV show this month because I pretty much only watched one thing throughout the entirety of the month, and it was great, so it definitely made its way onto my favourite list. Like I said, September was a really busy month, so I didn't have a huge amount of time for TV and just sitting down watching Netflix, but one thing that Jay and I did sit down to watch together was The Haunting of Hill House, and I'm so glad that we did. It's something that's been on my radar since pretty much it came out last year, I think, but I just hadn't gotten around to watching it yet, and we finally did this time this year because the producers of the show announced that in October they're bringing out a sequel, sort of like kind of related but not really related series called The Haunting of Bly Manor. This one is going to be based on the book The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which is a book that I really liked, and I really wanted to watch that one, but I thought if I'm going to watch that one, I should probably watch the original. And I also have read and really enjoyed Shirley Jackson's book, The Haunting of Hill House, and so I thought it was finally time to get around to watching it. And it turned out to be really, really good. I really enjoyed it. You'll have seen me maybe talking about it in some of my weekly vlogs throughout September because I've been keeping you updated on my thoughts, but we have now finished it and I personally really enjoyed it. If you haven't watched it, although I feel like most people have because I was super behind in finally watching it this year, it is essentially a book which is very loosely based around Shirley Jackson's book of the same name. And I say loosely based because it essentially takes place in Hill House, which is the house that that book focuses on, and some of the characters have the same names as characters in that book, but they're not those characters, if that makes sense, because this book is set in an entirely different timeline. So in this instance, we have a family who live at Hill House. So in the past timeline, we're following this family as they move into Hill House, and the parents' plan is essentially to flip the house and sell it and make loads of money. So we have the parents and we also have their 5 children. And so we see them at this house over a particular summer when they're living there, and we see all of the quite intense paranormal and spooky things that happen there. And then we also have a present day timeline, which is the children when they're then grown up, basically dealing with the aftermath of everything happened in that summer when they lived at Hill House. And I love the fact that we gradually build up this picture of everything that happened and how it impacted all of the characters, and I just love the way that this story pieced itself together. Although I wouldn't say this is a TV show where you necessarily get a really, really great and in-depth character development, and it also is a TV show that heavily relies on jump scares, it was still something that I found really, really compelling and interesting. It was a really great introduction into autumn and spooky season, because although it was definitely spooky and atmospheric and jumpy, I wouldn't say it was like super intensely scary, and it was just a really great thing to watch. I'm not going to say fun because I'm not sure that's the right word for it, but I certainly enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to now watching The Haunting of Bly Manor in October. Next up is my favourite song from the month. This was a song which I came across whilst watching a yoga video of someone on IGTV, and I fell in love with it, since added it onto my yoga playlist, and I haven't stopped listening to it since. And it is a song called Birds and Daisies by a band called Raccoon Raccoon. I'd never heard of them before, and honestly their music is quite eclectic. They have some really interesting mixtures of styles, and honestly I haven't really found any of their other songs that I really connected with as much as this one, but this one in particular was incredible. So like I said, Birds and Daisies, and I love it. I'll link it down below so you can go and check it out, because as much as I would love to play it for you now, that would obviously result in copywriting, so I will not be playing it, but just know that I love it, and I think it is just such a beautiful song. And then last but not least, I have a wonderful podcast to talk to you about, which I have been loving throughout the last month. Sadly, the season is now over. I believe it started at the end of August, and there was like 6 episodes, so it went all the way through September, and now they've finished for this season, so I'm hoping that we'll be back soon with another season because I've been loving it. But the podcast I'm talking about is We Can't Talk About That Right Now, which is by 2 sisters, Jessie Cave and BB Cave. Jessie Cave, a lot of you will probably know more as Lavender Brown from the Harry Potter films, and I haven't really seen her in much else except for a TV series on Channel 4 called Glue a few years ago. But aside from that, I haven't really seen Jessie Cave in anything else, but it turns out that she is hilarious, absolutely hilarious. She is incredible, and so is her sister BB. They are such a funny duo, and I think this combination of 2 sisters who are quite like dry in their humour and quite like deprecating to both themselves and one another just works so well, and they have this really like ironic and sarcastic tone throughout the entirety of the podcast, and they are just hilarious. My only critique about this podcast, or not even a critique, but just the only drawback, like I said, is that it's a brand new podcast and there are only 6 episodes, and I've been enjoying it so much, and it's literally hilarious to like the point where you will be sat in the office listening to it whilst you're working away at your computer, and you'll have to be like stopping yourself from laughing out loud because they're just such a funny pair together. But it is just so funny that I just wish that there were more episodes already because I've been enjoying it so much. But regardless, it's a podcast that I would highly recommend listening to. Watching Harry Potter and seeing Jessie as Lavender Brown, I never would have really pegged her as a really hilarious person, but I guess that she was just acting in that, and her actual personality is really, really funny. And like I said, I just love that combo of these two sisters having their sort of quite catty banter with each other and just sort of being kind of mean but in a funny way. It's just incredible. They're just both so funny, and I feel like there's no real way to describe this because they talk about loads of things from motherhood, because Jessie has 2 kids and is also pregnant with her 3rd child, from relationships, from being sisters, from grief, because they've both sort of dealt with grief, which they talk about a little bit in the podcast, to all kinds of other things, like the fact that they're both actresses and competition within the creative industry, comedy, and all kinds of other things. So it's a really, really varied podcast, and it's kind of crazy to think about how much they managed to pack into the quite short 6 episodes that we've had so far. But honestly, it was incredible. It has made its way onto my favourite podcasts of ever list because it was so funny, and I just love the dynamic between the 2 hosts. It's incredible. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't come across it already, because I love it. And so there we have all of my favourite things from the month of September. Like I said, it was a super busy month, but I found some time to enjoy all of those things, and they were all absolutely wonderful. I absolutely love these videos as always because I think they're such a great space to share some positivity and just enjoy everything and just reflect on what you have been enjoying and what has been bringing you joy. So I would love to know what has been bringing you joy this month. Maybe let me know what your favourite things were from the last 30 days because I would love to hear about them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.